One of the reasons I'm making this video is because I got involved in a very harmless and I was very polite discussion on Facebook today about the moon landings. And I was just, the names, it's just like the flat earthers, the names they call you. Now, first of all, get ready to hit the thumbs down on so many of you. I believe the moon landings happened, and there's lots of proof that they happened. And there would have, I know it sounds weird, but it would have been harder to fake the moon landings than to actually go to the moon. Now, I love a good conspiracy as much as anyone else out there. I do. I love a good conspiracy, and about 20 years ago, 14 Times had an article on the moon landings. I have it inside. I was reading it recently, and it was to do with the photography, and they said, can you reproduce these photographic things today? And they showed the light, how the light was better. And I have to say, at the time, I was like, wow, I just don't know about this. Could NASA have actually faked the moon landings? And as the years went by, it would occasionally pop into my head, and then the answers would come about and they would make sense, the official answers. And like here, some of the things you hear about people, there's a difference between a truther and a conspiracy theorist. This is the sad thing about it. A conspiracy theorist thinks things over and looks at both sides. A truther is just a fucking lunatic. And I'll give you an example. One of the things they pointed out was a picture of the LEM on the moon's surface, and they said spaceship, and they all laughed. Now, I just posted in and underneath it, and I said, hold on a second. That's like putting a picture of the Wright brothers Kitty Hawk plane next to a Concorde and going airplane. They had to start somewhere, and that was all I said. I didn't. And then some guy comes in, immediately calling me names, dipshit and stuff like that, and he says to him, "You tell me how that thing flew from the moon from 250,000 miles from the Earth to the moon." He actually thought the LEM took off in Houston and flew to the moon. This is what we're dealing with. This is the flat Earth levels of stupidity we're dealing with. And then when I tried to say to him, it only had to travel a few miles from moon orbit down to the Sea of Tranquility, and didn't. The only fuel it really needed was to take off again, because it only needed the fuel that was coming down was to steer. Right, that's the first thing. And the next one comes out with, and then Nixon making a phone call on a landline. He actually thought this is what we're dealing with. That Nixon's phone to the Apollo astronauts was a landline that went to the moon. And when I said, no, that went to mission control, and then the signal was routed into the transmission systems, which are massive dishes in high frequency signals sent to the moon from all over the world with a 12 second or whatever is delay. Ha! Smiley faces. And yet, there's the answer. That's how they did it. And then the thing with the famous, the shot of how did they film who filmed, there's so many of them. Like, they show one of the LEM landing, and they'll have a picture of it. Who took the photograph? Michael Collins in the fucking command module took the photograph. There were 3 guys went up and 2 landed on the moon. One stayed in the, and another one was, oh yeah, the famous one where you see the LEM and then it takes off and the camera pans up to follow it. Who filmed that? How did they collect the film? It was a live TV broadcast. The lunar rover had a TV camera on it, and that was Apollo 17. That was the only time it worked. I think there was 2 other missions, Apollo 15 and Apollo 16, where they tried to pan the camera up as the LEM took off. And what happened was that 2 times in 15 and 16 it missed it didn't synchronize properly. It's a very difficult thing to do because you're dealing with the delay of the signal from the Earth. They got lucky in Apollo 17 and timed it perfectly. They got lucky. That was just a complete, and they weren't even expecting that to happen. And yeah, okay, they're the dumbass ones, right? Then there's I mean, he really did think that the LEM flew to the moon on its own. That's bad enough. But then there's people who are, I would say, that's a truther mind, the mind of a simpleton, a stoner, right? Then there's the conspiracy theorist mind who would say something perfectly like rational, like, how did they get through the Van Allen belt if we can't get through them today? You can get through the Van Allen belt, the Van Allen belt. You can. The only thing is, you might not survive, and that's the whole point of this whole thing. The reason why they don't go through the Van Allen belt today is really down to health and safety. They cannot guarantee that this astronauts will not get massive amounts of cancers and stuff like that going through it. In 1960s, they didn't give a shit. Those astronauts were less than animals to NASA. And they even had, there's some very good, I've read some great books over the years about it. Right up until Apollo 11 went to the moon. And remember, the previous Apollo missions didn't just, there was 11. Remember, it was Apollo 11. What do you think Apollo 1 through 10 did? They tested all the stages in between. Would the Saturn V get this payload into orbit? Would it be able to achieve the spin trajectory to get to the moon? When it got to the moon, would it be able to orbit the moon and come back? Apollo 11 wasn't something that was the first one. It was a development of rocketing and space travel that had gone on for ages, okay? The Apollo 10 had orbited the moon and came back. They had everything, absolutely everything worked out. They had lots of testing. Going through the Van Allen belt, they didn't give a shit. In fact, it recently came out that NASA was prepared to let them die on the moon. They were not 100% sure that the boosters would fire on the LEM liftoff stage when it would leave the moon. And the astronauts were treated so badly. Remember, these were fellas like hard-ass military men that came into NASA, and NASA did not respect them, and they had to fight for their insurance for their families. NASA wouldn't even give them proper life insurance. They were so sure that they would probably die. It was a miracle that they came back in many ways, and they were willing to let them die, and that's why they had one in the command module as well, so at least one would return. It wouldn't be a complete murder, you understand, like that, a slaughter, a sacrifice. And I mean, it's so easy for people to sit there and say they faked it, they faked. And what about the temperature? What about the temperatures? How did they think that and they say, how did they survive inside the lunar module between the vast difference in day and night on the moon, between the extreme temperatures? They think that they were walking around inside the LEM wearing t-shirts. They were in these pressurized spacesuits that had all the things needed to compensate for these changes, both heating, insulation, everything was inside. They wore this suit to do this. They were not walking around in t-shirts inside the LEM. They were completely in. The actual spacesuit that they wore on the moon was a spaceship itself. It just didn't have propulsion, but it was basically the same thing as inside a spaceship. And the Van Allen belt, they got through it. They were all lucky that they didn't all get cancer. That could have easily happened, and that's the reason why they don't go today. It's really because of this health and safety thing, not because they can't get through the Van Allen belt. It's just because nowadays you would say, you're going through the Van Allen belt, what happens if I get leukemia on the way through? Well, tough shit. It doesn't happen like that. And even in NASA, in going to space travel, there are strict health and safety adherences that have to be taken care of, because more and more, they were the military, remember, that went to the moon. Nowadays, there's more civilians in space, so they're not just animals that can be thrown into debt and danger. People say that first press conference when they came back. Well, I have a whole other theory about it, that they actually had incredible. This is the real reason I believe that what happened on the moon was they had incredible experiences. They saw things up there. Now, that's my conspiracy theory, that they saw things on the moon, or had experiences once they were outside Earth orbit, and that's probably why there's a tendency not to go outside there, where they the rules of this planet broke down, and these hard-ass fellas in NASA and the military couldn't deal with it. And that's why so many of those astronauts, like Bud Aldrin, became an alcoholic, or you had the rest of them all becoming either recluses or mystics. Those men were in a state of shock, and people say, "Oh, it's because they didn't go to the moon; they had to lie." It wasn't that. They were, those men had, you could tell that was like post-traumatic stress, and I mean, it's just like the flat Earth thing. It's like, oh, and well, how did they? Who? We only have NASA to tell us that they went to the moon. No, lads, and this is the important one. When the lunar missions happened, there were thousands of radio enthusiasts who were hobbyists who used to track satellites and track spaceships, and thousands of them around the world, were getting kicks out of tracking the command module going to the moon, and doing things like waiting for it to go behind the moon so the signal was blocked out. Are all those thousands of radio enthusiasts all around the world liars? Another thing too is, now on the moon they left these discs that had to be specifically placed, and so you can fire a laser beam from Earth and it comes back, and those discs had to be hand placed. They couldn't be put down by a robot or dropped from a spaceship. They had to be pulled down. The work that they put into every single question, and I was there too. I know it's not that I didn't believe the moon. I was like, well, how do you explain this? Every single question over the last 20 years that I have posed to ask, did they really do this, has been explained perfectly by the official thing. Perfectly. Remember, you don't need something that looks like the Millennium Falcon to go from the command module to the moon. You basically need a thin, small box to hold two fellas and enough fuel to hopefully get them off the surface again. And that's all they, because even when it went down with the command module, that was gravity taking it down. All they needed fuel was to do the steer. So everything was just dumped on the moon, and all they needed was a tin box, literally a biscuit tin. And they say, oh, how could a biscuit tin survive in space? How could that survive the temperatures? Again, they were inside these spacesuits that were like mini spaceships themselves. It's so easy for people to post memes on the internet and say, explain this, spaceship, explain this. Nixon calling them. Yeah, there was a 12-second delay when Nixon called. That's well known. What you see on the news is simply going, we're very proud of you fellas. They don't show you. I'm not going to show you. Sit there and I go, how are you guys doing? 12 seconds. Well, Mr. President. 12 seconds. They don't do that on news TV. They cut it out to show you the quick things. And that's what the guy was actually saying. There was where's the landline going to the moon? They don't even have the basic understanding of electronics and how broadcast signals work. Basically, and they say, and they seem to think a lot of, photographs. There's a lot. I mean, I can sit here all night. That was the first one that got me. How come on the back of the LEM, they're lit up when in shadow? And that's because the moon is not like the surface of the earth. There's no grass. The moon is like a mirror, a grey mirror in space that has no atmospheric distortion and atmospheric haze. The sun hits it like a mirror, and shadows bounce in ways they don't bounce on Earth. They respond in ways they don't respond on Earth because the light is the brightness. That's why you can't see stars from the surface of the moon. The exact same reason you can't see them in daytime on Earth, because the sun blocks out everything. At night time you can see the stars on the moon. And then they say, how come they didn't photograph the stars on the moon at night time? Same reason it's almost impossible even today in 2019 to photograph the stars. I have two very good cameras. If I was to point up the sky and go click, I won't get the stars. It's the same thing. It's very difficult. You need long exposures on equatorial mounts that track the stars as they go, and then you get your pictures of the stars. Now, I wouldn't, that's it. It's the moon landing happened. The moon landing happened. It's very easy for you to play conspiracy circle jerk and truther circle jerk. It happened, guys. I know I'm going to get slagged off with this, but that's the difference. A truth seeker is not a truther. A truth seeker seeks the truth. A truth that says, oh, they faked it. Inside job. Scientific before. And that's the end for them. They don't go any further. Well, I tell you, in 1996, while many of you hadn't even sprouted pubic hairs, I was looking at this stuff skeptical. And by the year 2000, all my questions had been answered. Because the internet came along to answer the last of them, and NASA had websites and other things came along. The moon landings were not hoaxed. It's as simple as that. And also, people died. There was astronauts died on fires on platforms with the Saturn V rockets. And the moon landings had a magical element to them. You have to remember that. This is why they named them after pagan gods, Apollo. These were important things. It really was a leap for mankind. And also, who took the photograph of him landing on the moon? That was Buzz Aldrin coming down the ladder, and also they took turns. They didn't take the photograph right away. It's just all the conspiracies can be answered. It wasn't these guys were not going on a holiday to the beach, and it's as simple as that. They went to the moon. Sorry, they just did. Oh, and there was one more thing. I can't forget about it. They went to the moon.